And that's what it wants, to be able to move efficiently. I mean, people think it's, I got to get strong, I got to get mobile joints. No, you need good sensory input. That's going to create your fantastic motor output. And the complexity of the infinity walks, the visual stimulation, the vestibular, the automatic weight shift that you have in the infinity walk, the complexity of the movement in the figure eight, all these things add up to these sophisticated neural networks that our body craves. And, it was designed with learning and emotional disturbances in mind, of helping kids with these types of issues. But in reality, it helps us move cleaner. And when you see somebody do an infinity walk and then they're doing their skill, you're like, whoa, what just happened there? So we'll do it like for football practice, we'll do it before an individual practice where we're doing wide receiver routes, right? We'll do it before that. We'll put it into a circuit at the end of our workout that I'll do on the field. I hardly ever go back into the weight room to do our in-season training. We're always doing stations outside. One of those stations is always infinity walks. They'll crawl during infinity walks. They'll walk, they'll jog, they'll hold their breath. They'll do farmers walks, doing infinity walk, all kinds of different things.
That was Dan Fichter, and you're listening to the Just Fly Performance Podcast. Before we get to the show today, I wanted to mention a really cool item that is available now from our sponsor, simplyfaster.com, in their store. That item is Exogen Premium Wearable Resistance. Exogen is a series of tight-fitting sleeves along with uniquely shaped fusiform weights that strap directly onto those sleeves. So what I mean is you can have shin sleeves, arm sleeves, shorts, and a vest, and you can strap these uniquely fusiform shaped weights. They're light in nature, 100, 200 grams, that strap on in a way that allows you not only to resist movement very specifically, but also add fine-tuned elements of rotation to that resistance. So this is the next level of wearable resistance. You may have heard this from back long ago on the show, Hank Kreinhoff talking about it, to recently Chris Korfist, sprint coach, talking about it. This is the next level in premium wearable resistance. I've used it myself. I love it. I love not only the way it feels and the way you feel form and technique change. It's like combining technique with power. And so often we just think about weighted vests as just pure force, pure downward gravity loaded resistance. This is the ultimate combination of technique with power, and it shows up in things like Chris Korfist being able to take time off an athlete's 10-meter fly by putting the sleeves just on one side of the body, an ipsilateral resistance. We're using the body's own systems, fine-tuning it, and that's what this does. It allows you as the coach or an athlete to create, explore, and fine-tune the way that the resistance is rotationally impacting the body. This is next level stuff, and I know you'll love it. So you can check that out in the Simply Faster store. Head on over to simplyfaster.com. That's simply with an I, faster.com, and get your Exogen gear today. The nervous system is kind of this last frontier of sorts in sports performance, athletic performance, and really even just human being performance. It is complex, but highly, highly relevant to every single daily task that we are involved in. And oftentimes, where we have tried everything else, there is a neurological limiter that is keeping us still in pain or keeping us away from the horsepower and the just the true, I guess you could just say the full capacity of what we are capable of as human beings. And so the more we learn about the nervous system, the more we can understand, one, just how to be good coaches and to program training well, but two, to be able to find that why that one athlete is just not responding to this training stimulus, or what can we do with them in interviewing their nervous system to be able to get a little bit more output or to get them out of pain. And the man to talk to when it comes to taking more, I guess you could say dry, more clinical grade neurological ideas and porting them over into everyday athletic performance that you can nuts and bolts use right now in your training sessions, that would be Dan Fichter. Dan is a guy who is absolutely passionate about human performance in all facets, but is particularly interested in the nervous system. He's been on this podcast several times, chatting about the nervous system as well as perhaps DB Hammer and the InnoSport type training systems. He is an outside the box thinker and one of my earliest influences as a coach. He also is the owner of WannaGetFast, a gym in Rochester, New York, and he's trained loads of professional athletes, Olympians across a swath or a wide range of sports. We've talked about neurological concepts in the past with Dan. On this show, we're going to get into some things that I think are particularly pertinent or that have come up really in, maybe you could just say the last 100 episodes of the show, but things that I'm thinking about and I know are popular and amongst just coaching conversation. And those are neurology in respect to isometrics. And we're also going to get into isometrics from a long duration coaching standpoint, youth versus high school, middle school versus more developed professional athletes. What do they need from that extreme isometric or performance isometric type realm? And then we're going to talk about crawling, neurological elements of crawling. We're going to talk about infinity walks and head gaze stabilization and the benefits that that brings, not just from a general perspective, but also how you can tie that in with skills and skill acquisition. We're going to talk about the idea of sensory preceding motor and what that means from training athletes and keeping an eye on that. And finally, we're going to talk about what is Dan looking for in a neurological level warm-up? And also, what do these warm-ups and neurological-based workouts look like? Dan's going to give you examples of workouts you can do with no equipment at all that stimulate the body intensely from that neurological perspective and are extremely versatile and useful when working with really anybody. But just great nuts and bolts ideas, taking complex things and putting that out in a format that we all can use to get better and have more weapons at our disposal as coaches in helping athletes to be the best they can be. I really enjoyed this chat with Dan. I know you will too. Let's get on to the show. Dan, it is fantastic to have you back on the show. So I wanted to kick this off with, let's just say the top 3 things that you felt you learned from Jay Schroeder. So I know you spent a lot of time talking to him, learning from him. And I'm curious, with everything you've learned in the neurological world in that space, what 3 things have really stuck with you from your time and learning from him?
As I dive into this neural stuff even deeper, and like we were talking before, I start connecting dots. So the first thing would be the isometrics, and not just the term isometric, but the ways in which Jay implemented them and the thought process behind it, the intent has connected more dots for me in the last 5 years than it did 20 years ago when he was talking about it. So that'd be one, is the extreme isos, extreme slows, whatever you want to call them. I think not just in producing results, but producing answers for other systems. Okay, so that would be one. Another one would be, Jay always used to say that as he looks at somebody, everybody's fast and everybody's strong. They just can't display it. And I got to tell you, I think I believe that statement. I really do. I mean, if you just took somebody who was 300 pounds and grossly obese and they wanted to run fast, if they lost 200 pounds, 100 pounds, they'd run faster, right? So finding different ways for them to display being a human. And that was a pretty powerful statement that I think I've learned from him, that I've, again, connected the dots 20 years down the road. And then it's always been, with talking to Jay, is the body's ability to absorb force. And whether it's your foot hitting the ground when you're running and your whole body absorbing force and creating stiffness and all that stuff, it goes by the word of, you can't create force unless you can absorb it. If you want a 40-inch jump, you can't create a 40-inch jump unless your brain believes it can land safely from 40 inches in the air. So I think those 3 things I can translate into anything that I do and any work that I do.
Yeah, I love, I could say a little bit about all those things, but one thing I really want to focus on that I think is great is intention. That's something that I've just been thinking about more and more myself. With anytime you put the body where you're basically doing not doing nothing, you're slowly sinking into it, or things are lengthening, pulling into position, whatever you want to say, but it's like you have a lot of time between you and your mind and your thoughts and your neurology, right? And so, right. Like, what has been the big breakthroughs with intention in the last few years?
Well, there's a guy by the name of Sean Sherman who created the system Square One, as you know. One day we were chatting about his system, and he mentioned the word intent be wrapped into these isometrics. And I'm like, wait a minute, this is 20 years removed from Jay Schroeder telling me about pipes and all these things that you need to put into your exercises. And I think that was the biggest take home in Sean's system was these isometrics. Yes, the brain understands joint positions and better than it does muscle interaction. And then the intent wrapped around it makes it even more powerful. So it's crazy when you can connect a dot 20 years later.
Yeah, I know, like when you can find different worlds that are saying basically the same thing, it just makes it easier to, I guess, draw lines and triangulate and kind of find that all the gold that really is the commonality. I was able to have the opportunity to observe Sean and work with him and learn a little bit about his system a few months ago. And it's awesome. As soon as I was going through there, I'm like, I wish I had more time. I want to master this stuff. It is so awesome. But I know he does like the signal 6 and the isometrics. Could you explain a little bit about those isometrics and the intention, the way you would prescribe intention in those, and as opposed to like an extreme isometric pulling into position type thing?
Yeah, so Sean's whole system is based off how the brain perceived ground reaction forces, right? And I think what sets his system apart from a lot of systems that are out there is the fact that he takes human gait into consideration every step. Because every step you take, your body finds the easiest and safest path to complete the task. That could change from step to step, from joint to joint. And Square One is the only system I know of that can actually find and locate those systems. And Sean always says it's like interviewing the nervous system. And I believe that. And that's where it's become real powerful for me in terms of being able to pinpoint joint actions that are intolerant of this load that Jay talked about absorbing force. But now I can be even more pinpoint to find the joint that is where I need to focus the intent.
So
that
these
makes sense.
Yeah. So these are, so in the signal 6 or Sean's system, it's rather than, I guess, like a bigger, more multi-joint isometric, or maybe it could be, but is it more like clinical, like more like a single joint and a shorter duration, or how do those shake out?
He's grouped some isometrics together that cover some various joint actions that are really important in human locomotion. That's what I'll say. And it's almost like a hand grenade approach to treating somebody and getting them to move more efficiently. And then Square One piggybacks off that to where it's a little bit more specific to exactly what that athlete needs. So again, when you're talking about neurology, you have to hit it perfect. When you hit it perfect, gigantic things happen. And I think the difference between Signal 6 and Square One is it's very general in nature, Signal 6. But that general in nature still, when you induce a stressor, it still answers the equation most of the time because it's covering most of those joint actions.
Yeah, that's actually what I had that written down to ask you. You mentioned a few minutes ago that the isometrics and the intention will produce an answer. And so what is it, the isometric answering like the problem the body has, or how could you explain that a little bit more?
Yeah, the joint that's intolerating the load that's coming into the body. And the way Sean describes it is when the foot hits the ground, the entire body hits the ground. It's not just your foot, your ankle joint, it's your knee joint, it's your opposite knee, it's your opposite shoulder. And Jay used to say this all the time, water will find the crack. So if you dump water onto something, it will find the crack and boom, it'll go through. That's exactly what force does in your body is it finds the intolerant joint and boom, that's where all the force goes to. And now you're going to have pain in that area, or you're going to have some type of compensation along the way that gives you joint pain in an opposite limb or something else. Square One traces it all back and finds these layers. And as you peel these layers back, your movement starts to melt and it just changes. It's crazy.
I really like that term, the water finds the crack, and how you put that together with Sean's, like the idea with the foot and it just the whole body hitting the ground, this full body collision and that crack happening. And so you're talking about like the isometric answering the question of, well, where was the crack? And then using the isometric to remedy that situation.
Yeah, and in what plane of motion did the crack occur in? Is it in the sagittal plane? That's how specific it gets, and it's awesome.
Yeah, it seems like to me, I mean, as I explore isometrics more, I just released a really cool show with Stephen Jones where he was talking about isometrics for the purpose of a more global, like a skill acquisition. Like let's use it to help someone run, jump, throw, and put them in the specific, like a Franz Bosch term, like the attractor position, and then we'll fortify that with an isometric. And so I think that's a cool example from global. And he also talks about that having huge advantages over like a concentric, eccentric, like a regular lift, because it's almost like there's too much noise and there's not any chance for a specific, like a honing in on that train. And so would you say, I feel like in rehab or like reconditioning and those types of setups, it's probably like kind of the same deal. I mean, maybe just on a smaller scale.
Yeah. I think the way I look at it is if you had, those satellite dishes, if you put satellite dishes on each one of your joints, everywhere on your body, they're constantly searching for that feedback from the environment. And like Square One finds the satellites that aren't working real well, it turns the satellites back on and boom, here we go. And it's as simple as turning it just a certain way to make sure that the force that's coming in goes out. It doesn't get caught in there and create, neural confusion.
So really, in a way, I mean, from a water in the crack, I just like that, so I keep using it. But in finding that joint where the force is just not tolerated, it's really finding that joint, and then is this joint a problem in the sagittal plane, the frontal plane, the transverse plane, and then
Correct.
You give it an isometric that just represents that issue. So if I have a frontal plane issue in the hip, then I'm going to get a frontal plane isometric to remedy it versus, a different joint action or something like that.
Yeah, and I think when you study systems and not symptoms, you look at like Sean's system is, if you take somebody who's watching somebody run and they say, okay, I see this problem with my eyes. Sean gives me this example, and I use all of his little, I call them sound bites. They're incredible. If you took a picture of a sunset and a sunrise and you put them side by side, and you ask somebody to pick out which one was sunrise and which one was a sunset, you'd be grossly mistaken most of the time. And then you'd get the group of people who say, okay, that's a sunset and here's why. And they'd come at you and they'd tell you a story. They'd give you 50 different concrete things that are happening to show that's a sunset or a sunrise. And then you'll go, nope, it was a sunset. You said sunrise. Well, so people always try to paint a story about what they think they see. That's a mistake, because until you interview the nervous system and truly find out, you really don't know. You're guessing. And some people can guess right. Some people are really talented at that. Some people think they are and have absolutely no idea what's going on. I've seen too many systems identify joint issues or neuromuscular dysfunction someplace so far away from your pain that would make your head spin. Do you remember when I took a trigger point away on you in your trap when we were in Chris Korfist's basement?
Oh, yeah.
On your knee? I was down behind your knee to a trigger point in your trap. And you were like, how in the hell did that happen? That's the nervous system. So if you don't know, if you don't have the key, you're just guessing.
Yeah, I remember that quite well, actually. Getting rid of it'd be like, I'd have a trigger point and you'd just be pressing in different places and eventually that trigger point would just melt away. I was like, I've never had anything like this happen before. It's crazy.
So then I hear Dr. Carrick's guys talk about the difference between magic and science. Like if Blaine gets on TV and he makes the Statue of Liberty disappear, everybody's like, oh my God, that's magic, until you call him up and say, hey, Blaine, tell me how you did that. And as soon as you understand what he did, it's not magic anymore. It's science. And it's because it's the knowledge of why and how. And once you figure that out, you get a lot of stuff done.
Yeah. I've definitely experienced that. I remember, back and we did in Chris's basement, we were doing like the opposite, the good side, bad side arms and all that stuff. And yeah, it was really cool. I'd never experienced anything like it. So in terms of like talking about interviewing the nervous system, I know maybe we can get you and Sean on someday. I know you guys have been on like Robbie's podcast and stuff like that. I think that's a whole talk in and of itself, and probably really just getting to Sean's course. So I'd like to get to talk actually about, maybe as long as we're on the topic of isometrics, I'm curious how have your distributions as a coach changed over time in terms of regular lifts, isometric movements, time you spend in the warm-up before you get to the meat and potatoes. Yeah. How have those distributions been altered over time?
I got to tell you, I think my warm-up is more important than the actual training, number one. Number two is COVID has made my style of training with isometrics and body weight stuff way more effective than most coaches that are out there, because nobody really knows anything about the way we train isometrically. So I think the necessity of having to be able to, like I just did a Zoom session before we got on here with my football team. I had 20 guys on there, and we beat them up in about 20 minutes, and we're basically doing body weight exercises. So all inspired by Jay's stuff, and then adding some of the neural stuff that we've learned, and some of the Signal 6 concepts that Sean's created. It fits seamlessly.
I mean, that's the thing that I really, that the extreme isos and all that, and even like stuff like the hip circles or the shoulder circles, it's just like the exposure, the neural exposure you're giving your body is just, I mean, in a even let's say a 3-minute lunge or a 3-minute push-up is so far beyond what people would typically intake in a training session. There's just a lot of information. I think of it in terms of how much information is coming in the system if you kind of distill it down just to information. And that was a breakthrough I had a couple of months ago. I was like, what if we just looked at how much information is the brain being given by, whatever you're doing at the moment? And so basically, for a session like that, take me through it. Like, what were you guys doing? Like some of the different isometrics, or as a segue to learning more about your warm-up, take me through some of the things you were doing.
So the first thing that we'll do is we'll go through a Signal 6 routine, right? And then if we're out on the field, which we weren't tonight, we were just in the Zoom. So what we did tonight was we did some iso lunges at 30 seconds a clip. But again, it's focusing on the position, the muscles we're contracting. And then sometimes we'll add different eye positions. We'll add a complex movement up top. We'll add a complex movement on the bottom if we're doing something up top. We did staggered push-ups. I call them brain push-ups, because if you're moving your hands in a different way, your brain's like, wait, what's going on? So your cerebellum's engaged. We do that. We'll do our rebound push-ups off of that. What else did we do tonight? One of my most favorite things that I learned from Jay was quick style exercises. Have you ever heard him talk about that?
I've never heard him talk about it, but I think I know what you're saying. Like kind of like the EDIs, where it's like ISO and then quick, and then ISO and quick, or the towel stuff. Or
it's all towel stuff. So all the kids had a towel tonight, and we're doing my favorite exercise is a towel curl press, where they curl it up, then they press it over their head, they pull it down, and then they extend their triceps. So there's everything about upper body movement in one exercise. And what Jay would say to you is it recovers you at the same time it's training you. So you're training biceps to triceps, biceps to triceps. So there's that reciprocal inhibition. There's that, it all flows seamlessly, right, in terms of human movement. And then when you get into studying the brain and the brain stem and everything, it's all a flexion extension synergy. And that's all human movement is. And when that becomes reflexive, that's how elegant athletes move.
I like that too. I like, well, first off, I actually did kind of the same thing. Not all of that, but like, the towel stuff. So when COVID hit, and this is back in March, April, and I'm being tasked with giving these athletes, workouts at home. I'm like, and I know what their equipment is, generally speaking. I'm kind of racking my brain. I'm like, man, what am I going to do for like pull-ups and like just some of these things? Because people don't even have a pull-up bar, and I'm just like, towel, like I put in that like towel curl, then quick down, and it's like, you're not hanging from anything, but you're still reciprocally activating your lats, and it's still with max intention. It's still the same motion, and so it's almost like the idea of something super simple but just max intention. And I like that drill. I think that that was one of those things. I'm like, I got nothing else here, so let's do this, and have you guys do that.
It's fabulous.
You've talked about this before, I think, on the last podcast, but I like this too. It's like, man, if I have only a certain amount of time and I want to make something as effective as possible, like taking an iso lunge and doing different, like, are you doing like saccades, like where the thumbs are, and then the eyes flick back and forth? And what did you mean by some of the complex arm motions? Was that towel work, or was that something else?
So if I'm trying to get the brain to pay attention to a movement or to an exercise, like a simple bridge. Everybody does a bridge in a workout, right? We see them all over the place for glutes and everything. If you just did a simple bridge and you took your extended leg and you traced a figure 8 with your leg, or your arm for that matter, when you trace a complex movement, your cerebellum lights up like nobody's business. So now it's saying it gives meaning to the exercise of what you're doing. So it actually creates, I call them like a neural imprint on, this is hip extension. This is what it feels like. He wants me to pay attention to this movement. So there it is. So that's very cerebellum based, is when we do complex movements. And if we're doing something from a brainstem activity, we're going to talk about facilitating different flexors or extensors, and we might grin, we might gargle, we might have our eyes in one direction. All these things influence the contraction that you're trying to promote. So it's like a synergistic effect. And once you get the brain to buy into those contractions, they become more powerful.
That's awesome. I'm actually grinning right now, thinking of having a group of people extreme isoing and saying, like, put a smile on your face. Yeah. It's kind of contagious. I don't know, but like, there's this. So what? Actually, I'll say this before I get any more into it. Is, as you mentioned, like doing like bouts of 30-second isos and things like that. And I know Jay has prescribed some really long iso holds. So where do you kind of tend to flow on that spectrum right now in terms of your typical prescriptions, and where and when?
Really young kids, like my son's 10. I have him hold isos for as long as he can, because at that age, I think it's about manipulating body weight and understanding your body weight and understanding where muscles are, what muscles do what, and joint positions. So I get him into a perfect position, my son, and I make him hold it as long as he can. And then when he begins to break down in certain areas, I know those are the areas I need to target in the rest of his training. So the younger you are, the longer we'll hold it. The older you are, or the more developed you are as a mover, and again, all we're doing is training people who walk and run. That's what we have to do. That's the end goal here, is you have to walk, you have to run. If you can walk and run, you can jump, right? That's an easy transition. So as you get older, we're going to start weighting things. We're going to start shortening the time and making the contractions more intense. All these things will start to get a little bit more complex. But the younger kids, they come in, hold positions. Because when they run, they can't even hold their body weight up when they run. Why would I have them run?
Yeah. I feel like children, and I've experienced this when in working with club, track, and field. Kids as young as age 8. But I found some of the best people at isometrics were actually like 10 to 12-year-old, I should say maybe like 10 to 13-year-old girls who are sprinters were just amazing at holding like an iso lunge. They were really good. But then some of the kids, and it was interesting because at that age, it really did seem to correlate pretty closely with how fast they were. I'm not saying an iso lunge it is going to make you fast, but I think what I got was like the kids who were strong and explosive and cared. and I think there's just something about being like a younger athlete just moves more naturally. And I feel like they're just better at isos. Like I was just, I literally was just recording a podcast with Mark Wetzel, and we were talking about how good like young rock climbers are, like little kids who can like hang, their ability to hang and just sustain those isometric contractions. It's like they can go up on the rock wall and then come back down, and we're an adult, they'd have to rest 2 or 3 minutes and shake their arms out. And the kids like, boom, right back up, no problem. It's almost like their movement, just strategies or whatever, haven't really been, I guess, messed with, you can say.
That's exactly right. I think it's like their proprioceptive maps, right? They're compromised as you get older, because of all the injuries or the way you move incorrectly. That all adds up. So then when you go to show something that's perfect, you really can't do it for that long. My son, when he was 6, 7, and 8, could hold lunges for ridiculously long times. As he's getting a little older and he's playing more sports and he's developing more of these, I've got this, or I bumped this knee. Now it becomes less and less. So the challenge becomes even more. It's interesting how that works. Yeah, because he was more pure when he was younger.
Yeah, I'm still trying to I'm like super fascinated with that, especially having young children myself and just watching them move and just how like
Yeah.
easy it is. I was like, man, if I could to be to have
Yeah.
this raw programming again before whatever happens. I'm just so I've ever since I've had kids, I'm like, man, if you could just take how a child moves and then put power onto it, like that's really the end of the day goal. It's that's as for an adult athlete, but we just have so many, it's like how and where did all these compromises come in? Like you said, yeah, proprioceptive injury, stress and inflammation. I don't know, like it's probably a lot of things.
Anxiety, all that stuff can it's a stressor on the body. So the stress is going to change what happens to your body, and whether it be weight that you put on your shoulders or whether it be all day at work, it's going to change the way your body expresses itself.
Yeah. So in terms of like ironing those out, I have heard like an isometric is kind of a good place to at least hopefully reduce compensations and restore a better state, or maybe it itself is a little bit of a shotgun. Do you feel like, how do you feel like restoring the body to the natural state in terms of how important isometrics are versus like some of the other modalities? Do you think you can take an athlete and absent of other modalities, just doing enough isometrics, restore an optimal state? Or do you really need like the other things, the vision, the vestibular, the proprioceptive, some of those other, or is it just totally case by case?
I think you need a combination of all of that stuff going on. I think you need adequate vestibular stimulation, visual stimulation, and proprioceptive stimulation to induce all kinds of recovery. I think that some of the literature that's written on recovery leaves out the vestibular system. And I don't understand that, because the vestibular system is in charge of your parasympathetics. Like when you have too much of your vestibular system going on, you throw up. It's the rest and digest. So why not put that into your recovery workouts? It's not anywhere in the literature of I rock to recover. Right? When a baby cries and sympathetics are nuts, what do? We rock them. We do that naturally. We don't even think about it. Imagine trying to write that into some powerlifter's program, rocking, sitting in a rocking chair. They're not going to do something like that. But in reality, that's how we were designed. That's what creates relaxation. And that same system can increase your sympathetic tone, right? If you really amp up your vestibular system, here comes your extensor tone. Everything is turning on. So it's like, what's the Kenny Chesney song that says the cure is the cure is the disease and the disease is the potion, and it's the same thing, right? But you have to train it.
Yeah, I feel bad that I don't know that Kenny Chesney song. I like Kenny Chesney. I haven't listened to his stuff in a while, but I'm like, I should know that somewhere. Anyways, so I had based off what you were saying, actually, I have a question. It's later. I have it later in my question list, but okay. And before I forget too, I really like that idea of the push-ups with the variation. It was Michael Zweifel and Tyler Yerby. They have like a group, Emergence. I think Sean Mishka's, he's in there too. But they do a lot of like exploration-based movements, and one of the simple ones is just push up and change your hand position every time. And as I was messing with the different movements, I was like, I really like this. This is so simple, but it's great. You really distribute forces in an interesting way, or a different way throughout each. Every time you put your hand in a different place, that you're going to hit the muscle in a little bit different way, and so you're not, for one, you just aren't having the same joint stress, and it's a more like robust system. And so I just really like that. I started putting it in my warm-ups all the time, and I just felt like it was kind of one of those things too, where it's like if you were going to do like a really heavy like max push-up, I guess, with weight on your back, I feel like doing the variable before would open up the nervous system maybe, and I like stuff like that. Anyways, and so I wanted to ask you, well, one, I guess if you have any thoughts on that, but really you mentioned like the rocks, and so I know you've done some work on crawling and in some of your neurological presentations, and so I kind of wanted to ask you, what role does crawling play in your program, be it a recovery day, if you could stimulate the vestibular system with crawling for the recovery day, or do you use it on the main days, or how have you taken that training modality?
Well, I think crawling can kind of be linked into movements like the infinity walk, right? So it's this neurological cooperation that's going on. You have these sophisticated neural networks that we have, and you're just enhancing them. So again, I always talk about systems. So I was speaking about Square One and Sean and his system, and Matt Bollet, I don't know if you've heard of Matt from Canada. He's from Montreal. He has a system that he calls IP, which is all about motor patterns and how we develop movement since birth, right? So he focuses on the tactile vestibular proprioceptive system in stage 1, 2, 3 of these movement competencies. So going back and integrating the way you crawled and how you crawl plays a huge way in how you've developed movement, right? So if you want to develop that extensor chain, part of it is learning how to crawl and pick your head up and getting your eyes in the correct position to start to embrace your extensor system, because we're born into flexion. So going all the way back and rehearsing some of those patterns and getting better at it can prove huge dividends in the way you run and the way you walk.
Yeah, so I want to dig into that because when I was interviewing Tim Anderson, who was Original Strength, so it's like he's like the crawling guy as I've seen it. He said like you want to have kind of like a silverback posture and then lift your head up and eyes forward. And I never asked him why, but as you're explaining it, I was just working with an athlete. I mean, I feel like I have to say this every time I work with new athletes, is there's people who just don't want to lift their head up. And so if someone's crawling with their eyes down or a little bit, that's their natural mode, it seems that they're crawling. What does that tell you about that person from a neurological perspective? Or why is it important to lift the head up? So if actually it's like the extensor chain, or can you go into that a little bit on why it's important to have a head up in crawling?
Well, when you start to develop movement, you move just to move, right? And then there's movement with intention. So then your eyes have to come up, and now you're searching for where you're going. You're looking for a location. While you do that, you start interacting with your vestibular system, with the way your eyes converge, the way your eyes see the horizon, and now that develops your postural muscles. And that's part of your movement competency strategies. If you miss that along the way, that's going to hurt you down the road. And to trace that back, it's incredible. We go through some of these exercises in the IP course. It's pretty cool to do certain rocking movements, tactile stimulations, different vestibular exercises, and all of a sudden, the way your gait unfolds, it just changes because you've never met those competencies. Yep. So we trace it all the way back. I mean, too soon we're doing all these advanced exercises and everything, when in reality, we might not have developed what we really needed.
Yeah, one of the things I've been interested in lately is just the interaction between things like an iso lunge and a bear crawl and running, and what impact to do one and then the other, or just simply doing crawling and then running and then crawling and then running. And it's like you almost feel this different form of activation when you make that changeover. And it's so simple too. It's like it's one of the simplest things you could possibly do. But I just noticed that I don't even know why I started doing that. I was like, maybe I was just bored of my tempo runs, and I was like, I want to do something else, so I'm going to do some crawls. And I just felt almost some strange and better engagement as I stood up to run. I was like, I like this. I'm going to keep doing more of this. So so basically, like you're saying, it's really a primal or an early activation of the extensor chain. And if you lose that, then you're probably not activating your extensor chain. The recent individual I had training who was very poor at lifting his head up was also very quad dominant. And so maybe those two are related, right? Like if you're not getting that chain going.
Again, everything is in that brain stem, in that cerebellum, in that cortex. These things need to be developed and hardwired into your brain. And we go to these such advanced movements so fast that have we really even experienced belly on ground crawling or, regular crawling? We haven't. We skipped over some things. And you can see these deficiencies as you get older, as you get more injuries. Even the primitive reflexes play a role of the non-integrated reflexes. That's another whole thing where, people will say to me, well, you stimulate the bottom of somebody's foot and all of a sudden their range of motion changes. Yeah, that's what happens. If you don't have a reflex that's integrated, absolutely can cause huge changes. I mean, if you just think about the tactile feel in your hand. So we're all into this shoulder flexion and I have to, get full range of motion in my shoulder. What starts that is the tactile feeling in your hand, because that's why we have an elbow, to bend our arm and to feed ourselves. If we lose that sensation, that tactile sensation, that's going to jam everything up. So I'll tell some people before they even go to the doctor to get examined for a shoulder issue is get one of those neural spike balls, rub it on your hand a little bit and see which one's more sensitive. Is it the one where your shoulder hurts? Yeah, it's more sensitive. Rub that hand out a little bit. Move your shoulder now. How's it feel? Wow, it feels way different. Well, you just woke up everything that your brain's connected to.
Yeah,
sometimes it's that simple.
I actually got one of those spike balls from when I was at Sean's. Sean put on a daily clinic, and actually Jeff Moyer had one because it was at Jeff's place, and so he said I could take it. And my kids like playing with it, but I always rubbing my hands on that thing, and it's weird because I had an injured hand like that. I almost ripped the finger off of, and just the sensation on the palm of that hand, not even near the finger necessarily, is a lot different. And come to think of it, my shoulder on that right side actually has been feeling weird today. So I'm going to go, when I'm done with this, I'm going to go and stimulate that hand and see if I can get
I'll tell you what, you do that and then text message me. You'll be like, how does that feel better? And that's Matt's course, right? So now you integrate all these different courses. This IP course, it's fabulous when it comes back to tracing it all the way back and putting it together with Sean's course, which is the postural security stuff. It's just amazing to see. And then Matt teaches the posturology. I'm sure you've heard of that. That stuff's crazy. And when you're talking about these primitive reflexes and the action that can happen just from stimulating some of these reflexes, it's incredible. It makes what we do in the weight room seem so, again, we go to that equation. 10% of voluntary movement is controlled by your brain. The other part of that movement is all reflexive in nature. And I tell people this, if I'm reaching for something with my right hand movement, that voluntary movement is controlled by my left cortex. My left cortex in turn fires the PMRF that stabilizes all the muscles down my left side so I don't fall over when I pick that thing up. That's the part we don't train. If we train that part, we get way more benefit.
You're listening to the Just Fly Performance Podcast, brought to you by Simply Faster. I like the idea of, and you've said this, is the sensory precedes motor. And even before I found that spiky ball with all the little textured surfaces, I just love using lacrosse balls. And I think I had to get over, because it's almost like we start learning enough to be dangerous. And the thing I was learning to be dangerous was, oh, well, these balls don't really stimulate the fascia. We peg this stuff as myofascial release. And as soon as you kind of become woke there and realize you're not really altering the fascia with that stuff, it's kind of like, oh, well, why use it? I'm so smart. But then you come back and it's like, oh, wait, no, this was having a big change on the nervous system. And so I really started using last year. I really started using lacrosse balls before, like if we were going to do Olympic lifts, like cleans or something, or a jump, like we would superset it rather than just sitting there, twiddling your thumbs between sets. Let's use a lacrosse ball, stimulate your feet. And if you're not stimulating and creating this chance to have more sensation, you're kind of wasting time. I mean, you could stand at attention. I used to have people do power stance between or stand at attention between. That's something you can do too. But I think just dancing in between or just talking to someone, that could be fine and good. But I that was something big. I was like, you notice real movement changes, the way those cleans were going up, and like almost a feed forward from the ground up rather than people like kind of yanking with their arms as a sensory. That did seem to change it. And so that was like one of the first things I was like, just giving sensation before you do these exercises. And
that really tactile sensation is a stage 1 competency and then it turns into hand-eye coordination, right? So, I mean, the way you feel something in your hand is then going to be the way you start to move your hands and your eyes together and match that up. And boom, all of a sudden that becomes shoulder flexion, right? So Matt will do these drills in the course, and it's crazy. Like he's got an example of I don't want to give away some of the stuff that he does, but
sure.
He's got this example of a guy doing an overhead squat. And again, I'm not an Olympic lifting guy, so he's got an overhead squat, and there's limitation in this position. So he has him juggle before. And that hand-eye coordination and tactile stimulation and the frontal lobe stimulation, it's ridiculous what happens to your shoulder flexion. Ridiculous.
Yeah, I've seen a couple of coaches like Keegan with Real Movement, and then Max Shank espousing juggling, like just as a general thing. And there's another thing you could do between, right? But this just fits with. It's almost like I've always been on this quest, and I've talked with you about this before, but like pickup basketball is like the ultimate warm up for dunking. I feel like you can't really beat it, and. Right. Although I do want to ask you about infinity walks and infinity runs here, so we'll have that as the next question. But it's like there's so much going on there from not only a movement perspective. You have all these quick impulses and bursts and heel taps, and your feet are working really quickly, and you're getting your heart rate up, your muscle temperature up, physiological stuff. But there's also like this orchestra of movement in front of you and decisions, and the eyes are going to be going all over the place, and the head and vestibular and everything. It's almost like a juggling. It's almost as if you try to do like juggling while doing infinity runs or something, right? On some level, it's just this complete, and you're with your peer group, too. It's a peer group oriented thing. So I'm always just trying to figure out, I'm always trying to like get as close as I can to that type of activation. But
it's multimodal. I mean, that's, and to go right into infinity walks, that's what it is. It's a crap ton of sensory information coming into your body, and that's what it wants to be able to move efficiently. I mean, people think it's, I got to get strong, I got to get mobile joints. No, you need good sensory input. Mm-hmm. That's going to create your fantastic motor output. And the complexity of the infinity walks, the visual stimulation, the vestibular, the automatic weight shift that you have in the infinity walk, the complexity of the movement and the figure eight, all these things add up to these sophisticated neural networks that our body craves. And, it was designed with learning and emotional disturbances in mind, of helping kids with these types of issues. But in reality, it helps us move cleaner. And when you see somebody do an infinity walk and then they're doing their skill, you're like, whoa, what just happened there? So we'll do it like for football practice, we'll do it before an individual practice where we're doing wide receiver routes, right? We'll do it before that. We'll put it into a circuit at the end of our workout that I'll do on the field. I hardly ever go back into the weight room to do our in-season training. We're always doing stations outside. One of those stations is always infinity walks. They'll crawl during infinity walks. They'll walk. They'll jog. They'll hold their breath. They'll do farmers walks doing infinity walk, all kinds of different things.
Yeah. So just to clarify too, before I get too far down the rabbit hole of that, is the infinity walk is basically put two like hoops on the ground or two circles, and you're just doing figure eights, walking, running, crawling.
And whatever. You have a visual target that you're focused on the entire time. So there's the training of the convergence of the eyes and the divergence of the eyes. There's head turn, and there's hip turn. There's automatic weight shift, and there's this communication between right brain and left brain. All these things are going on while you're walking. So you have to have that visual fixation on that point. That's probably the most important part.
That's awesome. I like kind of like the in thing, and it's totally true, like, or the woke thing to say. One of which I think is the nervous system, but also is starting to talk about movement as circles and spirals rather than just these linear straight lines. And it's almost like I just like the system of fractals or something. If you see something on a micro scale, it also is on the macro. And the way I almost view that infinity run, it's like a macro scale of how we function, the human body functions anyways, which is these circles and spirals. And it's just like you're exposing the body through, you're on that outside of the circle, you're probably more supinating, and then you're on the inside, and then you're more pronating on that inside of the foot. And it's like you're just working the full, like you get to work more of a spectrum, the same way Chris does, Korfist does those like diagonal exergeny runs. You just get to work. It's almost like a 360 way to work all these joints in the body.
It's that subtle weight shift that we don't normally think about, but when we're emotionally stressed or we're struggling with learning and we can combine that motion. Like, I'm going to be honest with you, like part of my son's 4th grade curriculum is they have to read, I think they have to read 20 minutes a night. I set up a book and I put 2 kitchen chairs, and he infinity walks and reads at the same time, because that's his visual focus. And then he's got to complete movement tasks, and now he's got to read. So the retention is way better. His gaze fixation changes. His convergence to divergence works better. And then I put his lacrosse stick in his hand. So now he's doing that while he's reading. So now we're complexing it all the time. And again, we're making it more sophisticated. And it's a fantastic, that lady, believe it or not, Joel, lives in Rochester, New York, the lady who wrote the book.
Oh, really?
Oh yeah. I've emailed her like 4 or 5 times, and she's like, we're in the middle of a pandemic. I can't talk right now. I have a lot of clients. She goes, but I would love to talk to you about how you're implementing it in the sports. I think it's unbelievable for that. So I can't wait to sit down with her and really have a great conversation, because it's got tremendous benefit.
Yeah. Oh, that's awesome. So would you, will you do just is there like kind of a, like we have the 40-yard dash, right? Do you have like a set, like this is the size of the circle and you sprint on that or anything like that? Or is it just more?
No, we don't normally sprint on it. I'll jog on it. We'll do breath holds on it. We'll crawl. We'll do farmer's walk. We haven't really sprinted on it. But again, the complexity of all the movements that's going on within those 2 circles serves enough brain networks to kind of correlate to running fast and doing these things at high speeds. You could do it with your arms over your head, like Franz Bosch. You could do it with an aqua bag. Mm-hmm. There's 50 million different ways to do it. And, I would imagine that each person would respond differently to each stimulus. And, but I always put crawling in there. Crawling, doing infinity walks is crazy, because your eyes got to be up on the target. We'll have a coach standing in the middle. He is the target. And we go from there, and it's awesome.
Do you superset that with so if at football practice, you're talking like a conditioning circuit or your power circuit outside of practice? Do you ever superset that stuff with skills, like you're gonna do it and you're running routes or doing that's awesome. I like that.
Yeah. So part of our individual, let's say I blow the whistle and it's individual time and receivers come to me. So we have partners. One is doing an infinity jog. The other is standing in front as the visual target, throwing a football to them. They catch it, throw it back, while they're completing that infinity pattern. So now they have to work on their hand-eye coordination. They have to work on catching the football, which we do. And then it adds that complexity to it, and that the sophisticated neural networks of crossing over from right brain to left brain.
Yeah, I like that. So it's in reality, it could be kind of you could use as a warm up for
potentiation.
Potentiation, or you could do it as a superset with whatever else you're doing. Stuff like that makes me think about, and when I was talking about, I had this insight of like just viewing everything as information. And I think I had the insight of the best athletes can just intake a little more information than everyone else, because you have to pull off some of the stuff that they're doing. It's almost like if you only have, I don't know, however many, if you use fictional units and I only can handle 4 bits and you can handle 9, my technique is probably going to suck or whatever, or I'm just not going to handle, or I can't handle this game situation because I couldn't intake enough information. I mean, I'm sure there's different layers of it, but I was starting to think about, you just look at like awesome, just pure athletes, and they can do like cartwheels and backflips, and it's self-taught, right? And just stuff that, I don't know, maybe some of that's genetic too a little bit, or like in the DNA line, but I always just look at those people and I think you can just handle more or something. I know something's going on there.
Their bandwidth is ridiculous for movement. You know what I mean? It's unbelievable. But and that's kind of how I develop my warm up is we want to increase that bandwidth, right? So we have like 10 things that we focus on in our warm up, and it could look different every day, but it's going to have those 10 components.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
So what, this is like a main question, but it'll probably be like basically one of the last, I want to get to this because I know we've been talking for a little while. So just quickly, what are things that are like essential elements in a warm up? And you mentioned the warm up is really for you just as or more important than the actual, I guess what we would consider meat and potatoes.
It really is.
So, yeah.
So I think breathing is key. Teaching someone how to breathe. I think getting your heart rate up. I think some type of vertical bouncing, or I call it like piezoelectric tapping, making sure your heels are hitting the ground, creating a vibration throughout your body. I think you have to try to, at some point, have structural balance, which I do a lot of the good-sided stuff to create that structural balance before we even train. I think you have to address your reflex system. I think you have to address certain joint angles, which Square One and Sig 6 does that for me. I think you have to address your tactile, your visual, your vestibular, and then your hemispheres of your brain. So when you include all those things, and I think when I was talking to Chris and we were doing a Zoom, I think I made it into 10 things that just pick something out of those 10 things. There's your warm up. And it's not just a warm up. It's a brain stimulation that's going to make you stronger, faster, react quicker, smarter, all those things, because it's all brain.
Yeah,
all brain derived.
It's just, I think if we think of things as general, just this is stimulation, like you said, smarter. Like we're stimulating the organism. I think there is something to that. Like
absolutely.
I think that's. Let me ask you about the heel tapping real quick, because that's kind of interesting. I hadn't heard much about that, but so just bouncing, because I know I like for the elastic system and tendons just doing hops up and down, but so when the heels hit the ground, you said it creates a whole body vibration that is just a good stimulation of the system as well.
Yeah. So if I'm trying to stimulate the vestibular system in any way, when those heels are hitting the ground and creating that vibration, you are stimulating the otolith.
Oh yeah, the fluid has just got to be bouncing up and down in those ears, right?
Exactly. Then, from a bone standpoint, it's creating a piezoelectric charge going through your body. So there's a lot of systems out there that were created around bone tapping or vibrations in bone. I mean, if you look at all vibration machines, that's what it is. It's vibrating the bone to be able to create this piezoelectric effect. So I think that bouncing on the heels, and I'll add, we put our tongue between our teeth to stimulate the mandibular reflex. I think those things, little things, are huge, and it relaxes the body, completely relaxes the body.
That's interesting. I'm going to have to try that right after this. And what else did I say I was going to do? Oh, I was going to get the thing out, the ball out and get my shoulder going. I'll do those.
Please do.
I'll do those.
And then tweet it and go, oh my God, I was rubbing some freaking neural spike on my hand and my shoulder flexion got better. And I was bouncing up and down on my heels with my tongue between my teeth and my jaw feels great.
Yeah. I'll try like a quick toe touch in between the heel tapping. So your tongue is actually, I've heard tongue on the roof of the mouth. You're actually putting it between the teeth on that one.
Here's why I'm doing that, because there's a natural reflexive, like if you have tension in your jaw, all a trigger point is contractile things going on, right? So if you put your tongue between your teeth and there's some type of vibration going through it, the whole mandibular area relaxes because it doesn't want to bite your tongue off.
Yeah. Oh,
so
yeah.
In order to get a relaxation of that whole area of your jaw, that's what you do. That's how you stimulate that reflex. And then your jaw is the highest joint on your body. So when you release that and it feels great, your hamstrings will feel better too.
Oh, that's cool. I'm going to do that before I go to bed. I've been clenching my jaw a little bit too hard lately, I think. So maybe I'll wake up with a little less tension perhaps.
Or you can just do it like this.
Yeah. For those of you who can't see, Dan just put his tongue between his teeth and then used his hand to hit the bottom of his jaw. I'll do it too a little bit. So yeah, but that makes sense. Yeah, and because it has to. It's a forced relaxation. So I had another thought on that. I kind of let it slip my mind as soon as you were showing me I thought it was kind of funny how you're doing that. So okay, last thing is you mentioned so that is vestibular too, which is interesting. But is there any visual? I mean, vision, I'm sure it can get complicated and extremely individual. Just from a general perspective, you do like saccades or like a different, or with the infinity runs, is it woven into stuff? How are you engaging the visual system?
So in infinity walks, it's woven right into the drill itself, where you're going to have to actively switch from right to left and get your head to gaze stabilize. So gaze stabilization is one of the most important things to teach an athlete, because as you gaze stabilize, it creates that head stability. Franz Bosch talks about it all the time. So if he can find ways to keep your head still, your body, then the threat disappears. Threat disappears, you have better movement capabilities, right? So gaze stabilization is very important, and being able to focus on something is important. Getting your peripheral going and making sure that your peripheral is intact, because as threats increase, our peripheral comes in here. If you think about things that we do in the weight room and sprinting, everything is like this.
Tunnel, yeah.
So we're not training our periphery. Why not? Let's try that. Let's open it up a little bit to see what happens when we start to tunnel it in. We wear football helmets in football. That's closing us in to one eye field. Can't have that. You got to be able to expand that.
Yeah, I will say, I'll just really quickly. I feel like the best athletes I've watched, trained, and observed in the weight room, you might call them almost a little lazy in the sense, but but by this I mean they're not going to get super amped up and tunnel vision it to hit a 1RM. You know, like they want to stay open. Like it's almost like they want to keep options open as if they're playing, as if they have to keep. That's at least my take on it. With like some of these super smooth, good technicians, just good overall athletes, they seem, whereas the guy who's like the bench, like the walk on grinder, he's like, fire it up, you know, and then
everything is focused.
Yeah.
That's an issue. I mean, that's okay to have for a 1 rep max, I guess.
As long as you can turn it off, right? Like
exactly. And most people can't. And that's the whole premise behind RPR is you're stuck in this sympathetic drive. And if you want to start expanding something, you have to reduce it to go better, right? So you have to find ways to expand your periphery and basically reduce threat of the nervous system. And once you do that, you know, the whole strength training thing and the whole, it becomes a moot point, because if you can control your nervous system, reduce threat, that stuff just takes care of itself.
Yeah, it's definitely, you know, it's a deep world with the nervous system. But I mean, I've just even me with the doing something like touching my toes between sets and things like that, and just using that as a learning perspective to say, hey, is this train of exercises putting me, or warm-ups is putting me in more threat or less threat? Is my body, is everything opening up, or is it starting to close down? And just even asking that question has been good for me. So it's definitely good being able to talk to you and expand my own vocabulary on different things that I can do to hopefully further that even more for the athletes I work with.
Like I hear, and I know you talk a lot with Darian and those guys, and I listen to all that stuff. I love it all. But my thing is your feet and your eyes set your posture. If you think about it, your eyes on the horizon and how they sit, and your feet on the ground, how they sit, dictates your posture and the torsion you could put on your body if they're incorrectly sitting there. So before any of those things that need to happen with arches and all these things, you better make sure your feet are sitting on the ground correctly and your eyes are functioning correctly, because they're going to distort everything from the top down and the bottom up. And I think that's been a key to some of the development that I've had with athletes, is addressing their feet from a tactile sensation, from a reflex sensation, and then expanding their periphery. All of a sudden you start to see the way they run change. And I didn't tell them, yo, you need to run with high, you need to do it like that. I'm just reducing the threat. And then they start to move like they're designed to move.
Yeah, I know I've had that experience, at least just on the local level, with back when I was doing the Be Activated with Douglas Heel back in the day. Like just your feet, you do something neurological and your feet just, that's just like lighter. I'm just walking around easier. Like I get this. Yeah. I know next time I see you, I'll have to, I've been doing a ton of stuff with the feet. So that's like the lost frontier that I got to continue to learn a little bit more about. Cause I get it. I know some people, it's like, what can we get going on here that we're not already doing? And so I'm excited to hopefully learn more about that in the future.
Absolutely.
So, all right, Dan. Well, I know it's been a little bit of a late night for both of us, and so hey, thank you so much for taking the time, man. It's a blast talking to you every time, and
I love
appreciate it.
It was good catching up with you, buddy.
that is the end of the line with this train on neurology, the brain, the body, and athletic performance. Hope you enjoyed that one. Tons of great practical information. And if you like the show, you can help us out by leaving us a rating or review on iTunes, Stitcher, whatever you're listening to. Before we get out of here, we wanted to also give one last shout out to our longtime sponsor, simplyfaster.com. Suppliers of high-end training technology. Be sure to check out their blog, their online store. They are doing a lot for the coaching community, so be sure to support them as they've been supporting us as a longtime sponsor. All right, we'll see you guys next week. Have a good one.